Hello and welcome to the Building Design Primetime Podcast. I'm your host Amelia, and once again we're joined by Frank Geskus.
Hey Amelia, how are we?
Happy Thursday.
Yes,
Different
Thursday.
day.
Yeah, we're doing a different day today.
Different day, yep. And another special guest. Welcome Andrew from Res Engineering.
Hi Amelia.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
You've come from down south of the state.
Yeah, the main end.
The main end. Oh.
We can debate that. At least we've got the sunny end here. Yeah.
We could definitely debate that.
No parochialism here.
So, Andrew, you are a structural engineer, a senior structural engineer. I got that wrong. Is that right?
Comes with age. Yeah, you get the senior tacked on there at some point.
So you become an early senior. Not quite.
Never thought about it until now.
Yeah, thanks. Made you feel really old.
It's all right. I'm sure Frank's older.
Oh, man.
First question. So what is a structural engineer?
Oh, we design buildings, among other things, bridges, road infrastructure, and we have a civil engineering degree behind us that does a little bit of everything, so we can go on and specialise later, in my case, with buildings mostly.
They make sure the stuff that we draw doesn't fall down.
Well, that makes sense. You don't want that to happen.
No, it's a bit embarrassing.
Yeah, technically, it's two sides of that.
It is, isn't it?
Aspect of it is, one, you don't want it to break, and two, you don't want it to bend too much.
No, that's true. But everything bends and moves, though, don't they?
Everything.
Yeah. So there's an expectation. You know, there's going to be a little bit of movement in we'll talk about houses, but in housing, yeah, there's going to be a bit of movement, especially when you sit on stuff that isn't real good. And we're talking about the soils.
Yeah, so what actually affects what you can build on a site and how it's engineered?
Well, I'll stick to Australia and New Zealand, but it does vary from area of the world what the common construction practices are. But in our local areas, yeah, the type of soil. So if you have a clay area, then the footings and what holds the house up will have to be a lot more robust than if you have a sandy or rocky area that doesn't change much when it wets and dries, as well as what's below the ground. It's what materials are you using and construction type. They all sort of interact. Like a tiled roof will weigh a lot more than a sheet roof, so building that's below it will be built slightly differently, sometimes radically differently.
Yeah, okay.
And then to throw that in, you might be in a landslip area.
Yep, there's latent conditions, like might be an old dam on the site, which will affect...
Yep, had that.
Often some very strange things happen when trees are removed, and then everyone's forgotten that there were once trees there, and then water tables change or the root systems sort of start to decompose, and then...
That's actually a big one that people don't think about, isn't it?
Yeah, until it happens, and then everyone around the area becomes very aware of why is this thing tilting, why are those windows cracking.
Yeah, well, there's a gap between the window and the cladding. Yeah. But what we're talking about is trees being cut down. There's a stump. The stump might be buried. Mm-hmm. All the root material's still there, and letting it rot rather than removing it can be pretty detrimental to the site. Even if you're near it, it can be detrimental. So
rotting soil like that.
Rotting the
rotting
root systems
roots.
are rotting. And it's funny how, it's not funny, but the actual effect it has on the site can be quite dramatic.
So how does it work with, like I know, Frank, you've mentioned in earlier podcasts about, say you've got a site that is full of fill. They've, chucked a whole lot of goodness knows what on top of goodness knows what.
Yes. And to make it look nice, and they've seeded and all looks very nice, yes.
And I imagine that has a huge bearing on how it's engineered, because you need something fairly solid to sort of build on.
I'll let Andrew, because I've got no doubt you've done plenty of projects where we've come along, well, you know the site and it hasn't been prepared very well.
Oh yeah, the vegetated surface can hide a lot of surprises. On old farmlands, you'll find makeshift landfill sometimes and then move over slightly and you're on natural ground, so there's always potential for surprises to be lurking underneath. Others, there's some subdivisions that are just opening up now, one on the old Brickworks site down in Newtown because it's quite close to Hobart.
Yep. It's a brownfield site essentially, isn't it?
There's some known challenges in developing that site, and another one out of Austin's Ferry was used for sawmilling, I think.
Oh, I think that's right, actually, because I've got a family member that has just built in Austin's Ferry and said that it was an old sawmill.
Yeah, so they to access all this flat land, they just back in the old days, they just bulldoze stuff sideways. So you might have shallow bedrock up the hill a bit and then 10 metres of fill where they've just filled in a little sort of V-shaped area of the land so that they could use it as an industrial site.
Wow.
So...
Yeah, we've had that prospect. Remember I was talking about one, used to be an old trucking and sawmill and all that, and then I chucked about 4 or 5 metres of stuff on top. And I say stuff because we found building materials 4 metres down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, things can be old, not what they seem when you divide up the land into neat packages and put a crossover from the road to the block.
Looks nice, your dream block, and then underneath it, it's rubbish.
That's hideous, yeah.
The old showgrounds in Launceston.
Yes.
You know, we had to drill down 2.5 metres to get to a decent bottom. But it was known. Some of them, they're not disclosed, are they?
And the decisions that are made in the planning stages of developing some of these blocks can lead to vastly different outcomes if they've done investigation and can deal with what's there.
Where I find it really challenging is where it's an old sports field that might have been there for 40, 50 years as part of a school, and they are literally pushed out, topsoiled. Great, it's just a sports field. 50 years later, someone wants to turn that into a subdivision. Unless you do use historical aerial photographs, you actually don't know what's under there.
So how does that work then with trying to engineer something that maybe can't be done? So say the client wants a concrete slab, for example. Are there times when, say, for example, there's lots of fill that you maybe can't do a concrete slab, or you have to find a different way of doing it? How does it all work?
Most things are achievable, but it's how much money do you want to throw at the problem is the question that you often come back to. As you can say, you can have this shaped or located. You can locate a building here, but one of the main options are sink huge steel piles into the ground and then sit it on those.
But that would be quite costly.
The next question would be, do you want to spend that much
okay.
money to get the result, or do you find another way around it, move the building?
But that's also based on the quality of the geotechnical reports, or soil tests as we call them, but you're actually getting into geotech.
Sometimes you don't know what's down at the limit of what the excavator can reach to put a concrete pier into the ground. You'll only know once you have to sink some money into it to get an excavator to site, or the builder does, or whoever's making the decisions, get what seems like a reasonable sized machine for the job and find out if it's up to it.
Yeah, they can't actually do it. Yeah, exactly right.
Reassess if they find stuff that's really soft at quite a deep level, then just have to change. You have to go, well, we thought that this, what we showed on the drawings would commonly work, but now we've got to react to this new information, which sometimes during construction is the only time it can...
But also that's where I come back to getting quality geotech, because sometimes a soil test is done generic, it might be sold as part of the block. Historical knowledge is gold. You know, if it's reclaimed land, highways have been pushed through and they've pushed the soil to fill in a gully or whatever it may be. That historical knowledge is absolute gold. Now, real estate agents don't necessarily know that. So if there's any suspicion, you'd recommend to get a high quality and probably a more extensive geotechnical investigation to cover that, because there's nothing worse. Like you say, you go to site and go, well, this ain't going to work. Once they start excavating.
Yeah, sometimes you do have to be a bit reactive during that below the ground stage of construction. But other times you can have a go at planning ahead and
certainly
checking what the neighbours have done.
Or the condition of neighbouring properties.
Looking around with your eyes wide open. You run into a problem on a project years ago and you might be using that knowledge to apply it to...
Experience and historical knowledge is really, really important in a lot of cases, because this stuff isn't regulated. You know, no one regulates someone doing a subdivision, stuff that's been done 10 years, 5 years, 50 years ago to a site. No one's regulating it. No one's keeping a record of this stuff. And it might look fine. For the last 50 years, it might have looked fine, but in reality, it's rubbish.
And sometimes it's not just an engineer at the table. Sometimes it's the builder,
Certainly
the building surveyor.
Yeah.
Sometimes the person whose responsibility it might not be is sometimes talking to other stakeholders saying, or the builder could be coming to an engineer with a building problem and saying, you know, I've hit this thing. Have you ever seen that before? Have you seen that problem? It can work the other way too. We can go to the building surveyor and say, you know, I've hit this sort of hurdle.
Yeah.
That could be something like the excavator driver can't auger piers through these floating boulders that no one
even rubble. You know, you got to change from board piers to screw and steel piles.
Yeah, or the ground conditions change. You move 5 metres and you find something completely different.
You know, my favourite one was years ago. Got a call from an excavator driver. We got a problem on site. Can you come and have a look? The ground's collapsing. Go, okay, go out there. Dug a bit further, and you know when you go to the beach and you're near the water, you're not in the water, and you dig down and it all collapses because you hit like a water table. Mm-hmm. That's what they hit.
Oh, wow.
But what it was a disused council pipe, stormwater sewer, not sure. It was asbestos concrete. And that wasn't really the problem. But the problem was water was still coming through, but for some reason it was cracked at this point, and this huge area was wet underneath, and it all collapsed like you're being at the beach. But think of the scale. This was like 2 to 3 metres down, and all the sides are collapsing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sometimes it's a real see how it goes kind of approach when you're next to a creek and you go, I think we won't have a problem here. Let's just open up a trench and then we'll know what we're dealing with.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a can of worms.
Or something that looks great one week, you have a flash flood over the weekend and the builder's coming back going, I've got a real mess to sort out here. What's the best way to clean it up?
But they do come for advice. Builders, designers, everyone comes to you guys for advice. And you've got to make decisions on site. Sometimes you've got to make decisions that they're not happy about either.
Yeah, sometimes you have to be the bearer of bad news.
But sometimes I've been on site with engineers and stuff, and we're just talking about it with the builder and says, well, we don't have a lot of options here.
Yeah, and sometimes it's at all stages of building a house, they can go, we put this rectangular thing the wrong way around, and you just go, well, it's unfortunate, but you're going to have to get the crane back and lift it back up and spin it. Yeah,
they haven't followed the drawings correctly, and then you've got to make a call and says, well, sorry, you've got to do it as per the drawings.
Sometimes things can go astray and you're like, oh, you're in luck, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Here's an easy fix.
Yeah, but then it's just getting clarity. But this is where a good builder, it rarely happens if they do things the wrong way, but it could be their subbies. You know, some of them engaged to put up the steel or install trusses, lintels.
We got someone in that put the floor framing the opposite direction to what was shown because they'd just done a job that had joist running across the short direction of the room.
And they switched it around.
You do get calls for SOSs coming in like...
Is that like dopey bugger builders? Like, seriously, it's on the drawings.
Oh, there's definite cases that I've seen where they didn't supervise the apprentices and you end up with something having to be changed or redone sometimes. But
I remember seeing that with a suspended concrete slab, and they use a product called Bondec. It's a steel tray, and it goes in a certain direction. And talking to someone who did the inspection, they sent me a photo. Check this out. They put it, same thing with your flooring, they put it in the wrong direction, opposite to what the drawings were. So then it had to all be recalculated, resupported, changed around a little bit, and then they could continue with it, because they already cut all the sheets. Same with your floor, you got to recalculate it. Will it work? Won't it work? What's it sitting on?
Yeah, I can think of plenty of not so harrowing stories where you have a near miss or you catch something and they ask something just in the right point in time. Or they say, I had all the bars pointing the wrong way, so I just heated them up and bent them over the other way. Does that matter? And you go, well, this is your lucky day because it didn't really make a difference in this case.
But it's amazing how many times it does.
Yeah.
Because when you heat up steel, it loses its strength, obviously. Mm-hmm. But there's some dopey buggers out there. Think they can cut and shut, or my favourite is plumbing, where they cut out bits of timber or steel within a floor to fit their plumbing.
Oh, yeah, I've seen walls hanging there with an air gap between them and the floor.
Yeah, it's just, and you look at it, even if you're not in the building game, it looks wrong.
Yep.
So what makes them think it was a good idea in the first place to chop things out? Just bizarre.
Sometimes it's the way that trades interact as well, can throw curveballs on site, like the plasterer not understanding that they can't just go and sheet something and then people have to go and knock holes in them.
Well, exactly right. But even then, I think it comes down to lack of planning and communication. If plumbers have to cut and shut structure, there's lack of planning and communication at the very early stage.
It can be lots of things. It can be builders under pressure to got to get this thing by the end of the week.
Not supervising, had to go to another site.
Mm-hmm.
Send people out to do part of the work, but without that overview to hold it all together.
Yep, exactly. One of the things I've noticed is when we do extensions and renovations, that sometimes you've got the building there, or you just use a house, 2-story houses, doing renovations, extensions, sometimes some of the most trickiest, purely because everything's covered in. You go into an existing house, it's a house, it's fully sheeted, carpet, everything, and you're about to pull this thing apart, pull out walls, pull out bits of flooring, extending off it, and you actually don't know what's hidden behind in the floors, in the walls, in the roof.
And how do you even know what elements are structural?
You can make an assessment on that, I believe. We get you guys in to have a look at certain buildings, but sometimes you can't see it.
Sometimes with alteration works, you're working on clues and partial information.
Yeah.
But the way that our Building Act is set up, as it should be, is you have to have a plan. So sometimes you just put in your best guess at how something will go together. But you have to put it on there, open it up and have a look. So you have to have something on the drawing to get permission to start the work. But then once you start the work, sometimes you have to say to them, call us back when we can see what...
once you've got it opened up, let's have a look. Pretty common thing to do.
Yeah, it sort of feels, at a gut feel level, it feels inadequate sometimes saying
Certainly does.
We'll work it out later.
But there's no other choice though.
It's the best you can do, yeah.
Yeah, because you cannot physically see. So if you can't see it, how do you make the call? So you can certainly work out some of the load-bearing components. I've seen, and that comes down to experience. Hence, you're senior from an experience point of view, because you would have seen a lot of these things. And there's certain construction techniques that you say, yep, that's how they used to do it back then.
Yeah. Sometimes you can make educated guesses at what's been enclosed based on its age and
type of material.
You're not 100%, but you're just close enough to it.
But then you can, once they actually get into the works, you can go back, reassess it, do an instruction if you have to, and guide and work with the designer and the builder on site.
Yeah, that's sometimes why it's impossible to work on a sensible square metre rate, because something that's small and built around an existing building can be a very different proposition to having a blank slate, coming in and building it from the ground up.
Yep, exactly right. Because you've got a clear pathway. This one, a lot of double handling, triple handling of material spaces, especially if the clients are living in the house still and you're renovating and extending it. It makes it interesting.
Yeah, having to weatherproof it and secure it as you go.
Especially upper floor extensions. They're not as popular as they used to be because of the sheer cost. You're putting another floor on top of a house, and very doable, good idea, but sometimes it's not cost effective.
Yeah, similar to where we started with what happens if you've got a site with deep fill. It can be a case of how much money do you want to throw at the problem to get your first choice result.
Certainly, yeah. So we work with a lot of engineers and work with yourself. For us, documentation, we'll talk about drawings. In my lifetime in this game, there's a huge variation in quality of drawings and details. What's your take on all that?
Back in the day, before my time, builders were entrusted with a lot. You got a floor plan in houses built in the 50s. You get the floor plan approved by council, but then it was standard practice that if you decided you wanted your lounge room over the other side of the building, that was completely allowable. Now it's all... It's a lot more complicated what you can and can't do. So,
but also the housing back then was a lot more standardised, room sizes. They had standard timber sizes that were easy to calculate, pitch the roofs, do the floors. It was all standardised. But now we've got these ginormous open spaces, big windows, big spans of ceilings and roofs. It's not possible anymore to keep it simple.
Definitely. A lot more architecturally designed housing this century than last, for sure.
But it's not even the architecture, it's even your project homes. Your open plan living, kitchen, dining. You could have a room that's 12 metres long by 5 metres wide, and it's nothing unusual. That's a big span and big walls without lateral restraint on them as well. Big windows.
Yeah.
There's a demand more for bigger glass, bigger sliding doors and all that, and that makes it hard for you guys. You've got to come up with more clever solutions.
Yeah, I think if you went back a generation, no one would be even thinking of using laminated glass for atrium floors so that they can see down from the upper story.
But even like 300 to 400 kilo windows going in to houses where they've got to be craned in.
Is that common now?
It's certainly there, huge windows, and especially you think of the double glazed units. Like in Australia, we've got double glazed units, it's normal.
It's common,
In Europe, it's triple, and triple, I've seen some just recently where they put triple glazed windows, big ones in, and I was talking to the builder and he said, there was a 430 kilo lift.
Wow.
So for a structural engineer, it's not just holding it in place, it's like holding it. Like it's really, really heavy. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a sliding door, you can't afford the bottom track to bend at all.
I guess that would be a huge problem if a client was to change their mind during the build. Instead of having, a window, they're like, oh, I'm going to have sliding door put right here. How does that affect a home structurally?
Sometimes we have to direct the conversation in a way going, look, these are the downsides of what you've decided, give them the chance to reevaluate. Yeah, sometimes there's a lot of cost in making a change. Doesn't seem to the homeowner to really be that much of a
Does seem like a big deal.
Of an inconvenience.
Yeah. It's like, but there's already a hole there, you're just changing it to a door.
My favourite one is changing from a sliding door to a bifold. So a bifold door that folds back on itself.
Yes.
Everyone loves them. They're great in pictures. Personally, they drive me nuts. But anyway, everyone thinks, they just go in easy. But they're usually hung off the top. So a sliding door runs on wheels. Mm-hmm. Majority of bifolds hang off a track on the top. So you've got to put a piece of structure to actually support the top of the door.
That's a fair bit of weight that it has to carry from, the top side of the building.
You could be 200 to 300 kilos per leaf.
Yeah, right.
And you've got to hold. But if it's a change, they've already put a lintel in to hold the roof, which was fine. That's what it was intended to do. Now they hang a bifold off it, might bend a bit.
Yeah, it's cases like that. You're really hoping the builder keeps everyone in the loop rather than just plows ahead.
Well, that's a fair point. I've seen somewhere they haven't. My favourite thing I've seen in the past is where don't need that piece of steel. I'm going to put a piece of timber in. That's easier.
Whoops.
Well, not just whoops. It's really. Well, I don't follow the plan, I suppose, is where I want to go here. They've got to stick to the plan. But I have seen where they've done substituted engineered beams with something else and it's caused a problem. And I remember one, it was a sliding door. They did it and the sliding door wouldn't open.
Because of the weight?
Because of the weight of the roof.
Yeah, right.
They substituted this piece of steel with timber. Now, you can certainly do a replacement, that's fine. But in normal houses that we design, there's between the top of the door to where you've got to support the roof, there's only 300 millimetres. Sometimes. And once it bends, you can't fix it.
No.
Yeah, and then there's sometimes permit issues with making changes that affect either the size of the building or the appearance of the shell.
Affect planning, thermal, you get your energy assessment.
Yeah, that's one that often throws a spanner in the works when people want to make a slight aesthetic change and then you go, you've got to make up for that loss in thermal efficiency.
Yep,
so,
it takes time.
It can be unforeseen consequences of making any change on the run, whether that's a change to take things off the build or add things on. Most of the time, things from our end will get downsized as a project is planned because, for example, people will say, we don't want a column in the corner. We want it to be two seamless panels of glass. And then you go, I think you'll find that if you just put a little square steel column in the corner, the cost will make you want to do that. The cost saving will make you want to go in that direction.
But people see these wonderful pictures of, corners of a roof floating. Looks beautiful, but something's still got to hold it up there.
Yeah, or big projections off the side of a building.
Big roofs.
Due to its size. I can tell, sometimes that's the conversation you have with builders. You go, for what it is, gee, that's an expensive little item.
Yeah, and that could be decks, cantilever decks, roofs, entries. Yeah.
You can get all kinds of left field ones. Like people go, I want this sculpture type thing out the front of my driveway.
Yeah.
And you go, the size of the footing you're going to have to put on that thing and the framing that will go inside it. Yes. You might want to get it costed. Yeah,
well, this is it. Yeah, and that's what you've got to give that advice. Are you sure you want to do this? But to be fair, people don't know what they don't know. That's something we have all the time. They don't know how much something costs or complexity. It's no different. People thinking just lifts are a beauty. Retrofitting a lift.
Oh, yeah. One of them comes to mind. It seems like a simple proposition. It's only a couple of square metres. How hard can it be to whack on the side of a building? Then you get to what's in the way of it?
Yep.
How much are you going to have to interfere with the upper floor? It is what it is, and you're going to have to change it. And you just get this jungle feel of what's the budget for constructing this?
Exactly, but even if you're trying to put it internally, people think you just cut the floor, she'll fit.
Yeah, it can be hard to fit stairs and lifts.
Yep, stairs are a beauty. Retrofitting stairs, and you've got to resupport the floor. With lifts, you've got to resupport the floor, sometimes depending on the type, partly the roof.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't understand because they can't see what's behind the floor coverings and the plaster. how hard this stuff it is to do. Sometimes it's really easy, sometimes it's not.
It's hard enough even sometimes on new builds.
Yeah, exactly.
Surprised how often people go, geez, there are enough head clearance under that.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I think we might have to change this up a bit.
Yeah, and that's right. We've seen that on jobs too, because where does you put the structure, where it's steel or timber or a truss or whatever, does it actually give you the clearance that you need? The thing that we're facing a lot now is how to get the building to breathe. So you might have this big steel beam holding up the floor, but the floor can't ventilate because you've got this big steel beam in the way.
Yeah, when I started designing things, I'd never even heard or thought about thermal breaks between wall framing and windows.
Yep, exactly.
But when everyone's trying to be energy efficient, as they are these days, new considerations come into just being normal everyday considerations on a new...
That also makes you better at what you do, but also collaborating with building designers like us. We rely so heavily on our engineers to assist us to make our buildings function well, easy to build, and to meet the requirements that our clients want, from everything from simple to complicated. I mean, you look at the pictures on the wall that we have in our room here. You get some big roofs and there's some big overhangs and things like that. It can be done. People have got the budget for it as well, but also does it function well? And also you've got to consider where it's positioned. If you're on the coast, you've got different consideration with corrosion, and top it with your soils, how it affects all your reinforcement.
There's a lot of overlap in what we do.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, and that's why we do work so closely with structural engineers, and we rely on them so heavily, and our geotech guys, and we'll get one of those in one day to talk about dirt.
Everyone wants to talk about dirt.
Imagine, there's whole conferences on talking about dirt.
It's not my bag, but I do know some professionals that are very into rocks and
Very
rocks
passionate
and such.
about rocks.
But to be fair, you need to know a lot about dirt because you're sitting on the dirt all the time.
Yeah, it really starts from the ground up. Sounds like a bit of a
Cliche.
yeah, it's the word.
We might wrap up part 1 there with Andrew from Res Engineering. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to dive straight into part 2 next week in our very next episode. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening to the Building Design Primetime Podcast. Catch you next time.
You're listening to the Building Design Primetime Podcast.